Hello, I am George Rodriguez, Senior LATAM Business Manager, and today I want to speak with you about a topic that, at first glance, appears to be legal, but in practice directly affects the strategy of anyone formulating specialty fertilizers in Brazil. Let's talk about Decree 12,858, the self-control law, and how this new regulatory framework can be turned into value for your business, rather than being seen only as a risk of fines or a cost of red tape. To understand the importance of this decree, it is worth briefly recalling the path the sector has taken. The historical basis of fertilizer regulation in Brazil is Law 6894 of 1980, which organized the inspection and oversight of the production and trade of fertilizers, soil amendments, inoculants, biofertilizers, remineralizers, and plant substrates. In 2004, Decree 4954 was introduced to regulate that law and set out detailed rules on registration, quality control, and inspection. That model worked for many years, but agribusiness has changed. Plant nutrition technologies have become more sophisticated, pressure for productivity and sustainability has increased, and the Brazilian state itself has begun to redesign the way it inspects different segments of agriculture. This redesign took shape with Law 14,515 of 2022, the so-called self-control law, which created a single inspection logic for 18 segments supervised by the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. The self-control law essentially changes the center of gravity of inspection. Instead of a state that tries to see everything all the time, it establishes that companies are responsible for implementing robust self-control programs with procedures and records capable of monitoring, verifying, and correcting every stage of the production process. The role of the public authorities becomes checking whether these programs exist, whether they truly work, and whether non-conformities are being addressed. The problem is that for a few years we were left in something of a halfway house. The self-control law was already in force. Other decrees such as 12,502 had adjusted part of the procedural route, but the annex to Decree 4,954, which was the specific benchmark for fertilizers, was still anchored in an earlier logic. This created incompatibilities, uncertainty, and, as highlighted in the Revista Cultivar article, an important period of legal insecurity for the sector. It is in this context that Decree 12,858 published in 2026 comes in. It does not throw away everything that existed but updates the annex to Decree 4,954 to align fertilizer regulation with Law 14,515 and with the risk-based inspection and self-control model. What does this mean in practice for you, a formulator of specialty fertilizers, organominerals, biofertilizers, inoculants, and related products? First, the decree reorganizes the sanctioning regime. It details precautionary measures, classifies infringements, updates sanctions, and introduces the category of moderate infringement in addition to minor, serious, and very serious infringements. Fine ranges now follow the references in the self-control law, taking into account the economic scale of the regulated operator. This makes the environment more predictable, but also more demanding. The rules are clearer, and the financial impact of a significant nonconformity can be substantial. Second, the decree consolidates the requirement for self-control programs across the entire input chain covered, including fertilizers, soil amendments, inoculants, biofertilizers, remineralizers, and substrates. These programs must include systematized procedures and controls that allow the monitoring, verification, and correction of production stages from raw material intake to final product distribution. They may also make use of existing quality management systems, good manufacturing practices, and routines already in place within the company. Third, the decree regulates the Agricultural Defense Compliance Incentive Program, provided for in the self-control law itself. Participation is voluntary, but it creates benefits for those who can demonstrate a consistent compliance history, such as the possibility of regularizing minor or moderate infringements by notification rather than moving immediately to harsher measures. In practice, it is a mechanism to reward those who take compliance seriously. Viewed only from that angle, it looks like a regulatory checklist. But when we step back and think like formulators and B2B business leaders, it becomes clear that there is a strategic agenda hidden here. If the rules of the game are now self-control, traceability, clear responsibilities, and predictable sanctions, then the companies that organize their internal nervous system best will negotiate differently with distributors, cooperatives, agribusinesses, and large farming groups. Instead of talking only about price per ton and nutrient concentration, you are now in a position to talk about regulatory reliability, lower embargo risk, batch-to-batch formulation consistency, and alignment with ESG and food safety requirements. For specialty fertilizers, where there is usually greater complexity in raw materials, processes, claims, and agronomic positioning, this is even more relevant. We are talking about organominerals, sophisticated blends, soil conditioners, biofertilizers, and inoculants, where the difference between a serious product and an opportunistic one is not just on the label, but in the robustness of the entire quality and compliance system. So the question is no longer how do I reduce the impact of this decree, but rather how do I turn this new regulatory framework into a value argument for my portfolio? From a practical point of view, that means mapping the regulatory risks in your portfolio, reviewing registrations and records in light of the new regulation, establishing or strengthening the self-control program, ensuring quality control analyses are carried out in laboratories duly registered with the Ministry of Agriculture, and above all, turning all of this into clear information for the market. In other words, compliance stops being a file hidden away in legal or regulatory and becomes part of the value proposition. Sales teams need to be able to explain why working with a formulator that has a mature self-control program reduces risk exposure, provides supply predictability, and strengthens the reputation of the entire chain. The Cultivar article stresses that the decree is not the final point in this process. Many details will still come in ordinances and normative instructions, requiring continuous technical dialogue between government and the productive sector. This incremental movement reinforces the need for companies to follow the regulatory agenda with attention and speed. At AgroLatam Intel, our role is to help you connect these dots, to organize the strategic reading of Decree 12,858 and the Self-Control Law, translate the requirements into risk maps, prioritize actions by product family and customer type, and support the construction of B2B narratives in which compliance is not just an obligation but a competitive advantage. If you lead formulation, quality, regulatory affairs, or business in specialty fertilizers and want to use this new regulatory framework to your advantage, I invite you to keep following the content we will be sharing and above all to arrange a conversation with our team. The modernization of the regulatory framework is not only a challenge, it is an opportunity to separate those who are ready to play the long game in Brazilian agribusiness from those who still treat compliance as a last-minute task. Let us turn Decree 12,858 and the Self-Control Law into a true seal of trust for your brand and for your specialty fertilizer portfolio.